Well, hello and welcome to this week's vlog. Firstly, I hope you're all well, I hope you're all safe, I hope you're all staying indoors. Remember, don't go out and make any journeys unless they're absolutely essential. Keep yourself and your loved ones safe in these strange days. Secondly, I hope that you are watching the pubcast vlogs, which have been really interesting to, well, certainly really interesting to film, a lot of fun to film. This week's one is over on Jamie Overland's channel. I'll put a link up in the corner and in the description if you want to go and check that out. And we're recording a new one on Friday, which has got a couple of special guests, so that should be good fun. So I think that's going out on Darren Knight's channel, so yeah, keep an eye out for that as well. Anyway, moving on, you may recall last week that I released a video from Lanzarote which I filmed back in 2018, and the reason I didn't release that at the time is I wasn't very happy with the images. But you know, desperate times call for desperate measures and all that, so I did release it. But one thing that allowed me to do was to revisit those images and actually re-edit them, and I filmed myself doing that, and I thought you might be interested in taking a look to see, you know, how I went about editing those and how I went about looking at some, you know, images that I'm not really massively keen on, and how I try to bring them to life. So yeah, so that's what this video is about, and here it is. So these are 4 images that I'm going to use for the vlog, and as you can see, they're not exactly the most inspiring of shots. As I said, may have said on the day, I was having a bit of difficulty at the time trying to find some decent shots, and the light wasn't helping. There were some moody skies in places, but then in other places it was very bland, and there was absolutely pretty much zero sunlight. So yeah, it wasn't exactly easy. But what I'm going to do is I'm going to start off with what I think is probably the shot that's got the most potential, which is number 4 here. And I'm going to try and work something with this one. Now, things I like about this shot, this nice bit of foreground interest here in this rock, a little tiny smattering of light on the volcano there. The sky is reasonably interesting. It's got potential. Things I don't like about this shot, it's too much mid-ground. That's very bland and nothingy, and this line here, which is obviously where the ground drops away. So the first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to open this up in Photoshop and get rid of this mid-ground here, compress the image if you will. So I'm going to edit in Photoshop, and I'm going to edit a copy using Lightroom because I want to show the before and after. Okay, so here's the image in Photoshop, and where I want to, or the bit I want to remove essentially is a large chunk of this bit here. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to just get rid of that as a base layer by clicking the padlock, and I'm going to duplicate the layer, and then I'm going to get my lasso select tool, and I'm just going to draw a really rough outline along the top of that ridge. Ooh, I just messed that up a little bit there. I'm just going to add this bit in. Okay, and then I'm going to invert that selection and delete that top completely. So if I get rid of the bottom layer, you can see I've got rid of that. And then what I'm going to do is I'm going to move it up to somewhere where it's just going to get rid of the main body, if you like, of that mid-ground. That'll do. I'm going to crop the image up to the bottom there, and that's just gotten rid of that mid-ground there. And then what I'm going to do now, I'm going to put a layer mask on. I'm just going to paint out just a little of this darkness here. There you go. You can't really see a join there at all, but I've just gotten rid of quite a bit of that mid-ground. I'm just going to save that out. And here we are back in Lightroom, and if I just show you the two together, so that's the original there, and that's the edited version, and you can see I've just gotten rid of a little bit of this mid-ground here. So the next thing I'm going to do is I'm just going to do a few standard adjustments. I'm going to pull the highlights down because I really want to focus in on this sky area and this nice area here. Not going to do too much with the shadows. I'm just going to push the whites up as well. I'm holding the Alt key on the PC so I can see when I'm starting to clip, and there you are. I'm just going to pull that back a touch. I'm just going to pull the blacks down a little bit, not too much, just to give a little bit more definition there as well. I'm just going to bump up the texture slightly. Just have a look at the dehaze. What will that do? Oh yeah, quite like that. Not too much on the dehaze, but just a little. I'm going to leave the clarity alone. I think I might pull the saturation down slightly. Just push up the vibrance slightly. Just pull that back up a touch. Okay, so there's my basic edits there. And what I'm going to do now is I'm going to start emphasizing a bit of this light. So I'm going to come in close, not that close, and I'm going to use a radial filter here. So I'm just going to position this, get that in place. So if I turn on the mask, you can see that it's affecting everything other than this filtered area. And what I want it to actually do is affect just this area. So I'm going to select invert here, and it's only going to select that area. And I'm just going to reset these effects, because as you can see, I've got the highlights dragged down here. If I just double click on effects, I'll reset it, and I'm just going to pull up the exposure slightly. Maybe just pull the clarity up a little bit, so I just still maintaining this dark area here. Maybe just ever so slightly drop the shadows. Okay, and then what I'm going to do is I'm going to duplicate this. I'm going to drag it over, just position it sort of there. Okay, and now you should be able to see that's just pulled up that interesting area there where the sun's hitting the side of the volcano. So if I look at it before, so that's it before, and that's it after. Just pulled up that detail a bit there. And I want to do the same with this area of, I'm going to call it lichen. I'm just going to make that a bit bigger so I can see what I'm doing. So radial filter, just going to drag a bit on here. Just select invert, and then just pull up the exposure a little bit on that as well. Possibly the contrast too. Don't want to go mad with this actually, just a little. Don't want to go too mad. And then duplicate that again, drag it over here. Just going to flatten this right out. Drop it on that area there as well. So you can see I've just brought that up a little bit there. And the other thing I want to do, I think, is I want to add, actually, I'm just going to turn those down a little bit. I think that's just slightly too much. Okay, that's a bit better. And the other thing I want to do, I just want to add a little bit of interest down this area here. So I'm going to carry on using these radial filters, and I'm just going to invert again and just pull up the exposure here a little, not too much, just a little, and duplicate that. And duplicate that again, just pull it down here, maybe just lengthen that out a little bit, turn that way. Let's just turn it a bit more. Just pulled a little bit of light through this area here, just to give you something a bit more interesting. You can see on this one here, I've just caught this rock at the bottom here. So if I take the brush tool and just press the Alt key on my keyboard on the PC, I can just paint that little bit out. I can show you that on the overlay there. It's just deselected that area by using the brush tool here. Not this brush tool, but the brush on the radial filter. So just brush that bit out. So that's before and that's after. I'm just pulling a little bit of light through that area just to make it a little bit more interesting. Now I want to just give the sky a bit more interest, so I'm going to put a graduated filter on here. Just going to pull it down, not going to go too far, and let's just take the overlay off. I'm just going to drop the exposure slightly, push up the contrast a little, drop the highlights, and I'm just going to desaturate it slightly because I find it a little bit blue. So yeah, quite happy with that. One last thing I'm going to do, I think, is I'm just going to drop the exposure ever so slightly to the entire image. And put a bit of a vignette on. And I'm quite happy with that. That's the finished image there for me. So if we look at the original, here's the original and here's the finished image. Hopefully you can see that we've just brought a little bit more of the features out in this shot where needed. So there's a little bit more light on this rock, there's a little bit of light through the midground, there's some nice light here on the volcano now, and the sky's a bit more dramatic. So yeah, I'm happy with that one. Okay, so the next one I'm going to look at is number 2 here, because it's got an interesting sky and there's quite a lot going on. There's a decent leading line and I think I can make something out of this, but there's a few definite issues that I'm going to have to deal with in Photoshop specifically. I think there's quite a lot of elements that I'm going to need to clone out. So let's have a look at this one. So the first thing I want to do is I want to crop it down, and I think there's an awful lot of foreground on it, so I'm going to get rid of that for a start. I think I'm going to pull this over a touch here and here. Just thinking quite how much I need to do. Maybe if I just pull that into there, let's have a look at that. So that's better. Does it need straightening slightly? Can't quite work out. I think everything's slightly off with this anyway, so I think that it doesn't really matter if it's not particularly straight, but I do like the road here coming out of this bottom left hand corner and then snaking off and round. Now before we get started, I think what I'm going to do is I'm going to do some work in Photoshop. I need to get rid of this sign here. I need to get rid of, I think, this building here. I need to get rid of these lights on this car. I need to get rid of this sign here. And probably a couple of more bits and pieces, but we'll have a look. So let's open this up in Photoshop. So here we are in Photoshop. Let's get rid of a few of these little nasty bits first. So I'm going to take the lasso tool here and I'm just going to select around this area and shift and F5, which will bring up my content aware fill. which usually does a really good job. And there you go, it's done it again. And let's just clear off these couple of nasty poles. Shift and F5. And again. I've left a bit of that one, haven't I? Yeah, a little bit. That's pretty much barely noticeable, although you probably wouldn't notice it, but I can see it here that you've got a little bit of differential between this background and this bit here. So what I'm going to do is I'm just going to use the clone stamp and just pull a little bit of this detail across, and now you can't really tell at all. And we need to remove these lights, which is going to be possibly a little bit more tricky, but I might actually get rid of the pole as well to help me out with that, the pole and the lights. Just try and get rid of as much of that as I can. Shift and F5. I mean, it's so far in the distance you probably wouldn't even notice it, but again I can. So I'm just going to clone that bit out there. Maybe just clone a little bit. And the other thing I want to do is remove this pole here because it's just overlapping the main one and I don't like that particularly, so I'm just going to lasso select all of that and just get rid of it. Again, Shift and F5, Content Aware Fill does a pretty good job. Just finish off that work with a little bit of clone stamping just to bring back some of the detail. There we go, it's pretty good. So there's a few more distractions dotted about that I'm just going to quickly get rid of, and then I'll come back to you in Lightroom once I've tidied it all up. So here we are now back in Lightroom, and this is the original and this is the one with the cloned out bits and pieces. As you can see, we've just made it a little bit less distracting, simplified the image down a little bit. So now what I'm going to do is just some minor adjustments as I normally do. Just pull out the shadows a little bit, drop the highlights, pull up the whites again, holding down the Alt key. That's probably gone too far. Drop the blacks a little bit. I'm going to go too far with that either. A little bit of texture. Just going to zoom in here to these far mountains, and you can just see if you just put a little bit of texture in, it's just pulling up some detail in there. And again with the dehaze, as long as you don't go mad, it's just getting a little bit more detail, a little bit more going on at the back there. There's no light at all, so there's not a lot you can do about that, unfortunately, but at least we can pull a little bit of that out. Now, what else do we want to do? I just want to bump the contrast up a little bit, drop the saturation slightly, maybe pull up the vibrance a bit. We're getting the makings of an all right picture. Again, like I say, the light was very poor on the day, so it's kind of difficult to make any real interest out of this, but we're doing what we can. Okay, so I don't like these areas here of sort of this green, so I'm going to go down to my color palette. I think this might be more yellow, but I'm just going to desaturate a bit of the green out and desaturate a bit of the yellow out. Not sure how much that's done. Let's have a look. So if we go into before and after, just dulled it down a tad. I'm going to pull a graduated filter down from the sky. It's going to give the sky a little bit more oomph. So I'm going to push the contrast, drop the shadows, maybe ever so slightly drop the exposure, push the texture up, maybe on this one just bump the clarity slightly. And if you can see here, it's just, so if I pull this down to make it a bit more prominent, you can see it's just affecting the top of these mountains here. So what I can do is I can use the luminosity range mask and just pull that up. So if I just pull this range, so let's just, if I show the overlay, just pull that up, it's going to pull it away from the top of these mountains. But you're also going to lose a bit here from the top. So instead of that, I'm going to use a combination of things. I'm just going to use a luminosity mask to a lesser extent. And then I'm going to just hit the brush. And I'm just going to brush out the, make it slightly bigger. Just going to brush it out on the top there. And hopefully that's going to give a slightly better effect. Maybe that sky's slightly too powerful. It's difficult, isn't it? I don't want to make it too strong. Okay. So what now? Let's just put up a grad filter here along the bottom, and let's just add a bit of clarity in and some texture into the bottom, so it's just pulling you up through the picture a little bit. And if you can see what that's done, so this before and that's after, and it's just a slight thing, but I just feel it just pulls you up. It's just a bit sharper in the foreground and it just pulls you up a little bit. And I just want to also paint a little bit of texture on these mountains at the back. And just maybe push the clarity not too much. I feel like that, so I've added a little bit of texture there, a little bit of clarity and a little bit of dehaze, and I just feel that if I just turn that off and then back on again, I just feel that's just pulled those mountains out a little bit and given a bit more definition. I think I'm gonna just up the exposure across the whole piece because it's slightly dark. Yeah, that looks good. I'm going to add in a bit of a vignette, as I always do. I could go further. I could start playing about with these filters, these radial filters, and maybe try and give the impression, so let's have a look, give the impression of a bit of light on these far hills, perhaps. Let's duplicate. So let's just warm that up slightly first, just a little. Drop that a tad, and duplicate that. Pull it over to this bit here. Maybe just push that up slightly. I think I might need to do a bit of work as well with this sky. I think it looks a bit, this doesn't quite look right. Let me drop the saturation a touch. There, yeah. So I've made a slight adjustment. So I made a slight adjustment there to the sky. Put a little bit of light on those far hills. It's a dark image. I appreciate that, but it was a very dark day. So I don't want to go and make it too different from how it. I want to make it reasonably representative of the day. So what I'm going to do, I think, is I'm just going to use another radial filter, and I'm just going to lighten this whole area up here. Just going to brush out this little bit. Perhaps just duplicate that. Okay, so I think I'm happy with this now. So let's have a look at the original. That's the original, and this is the adjusted one. And as you can see, there's quite a lot of adjustments made. Hopefully that's just brought out a little bit of interest in the shot there. And yeah, it's not perfect. The light wasn't great, and the image itself isn't amazing, but I think hopefully that's pulled out the best I can from that particular image. Enjoyed that little editing process there. I threw that last picture in without the post. It was sort of an afterthought that, oh, I wonder what this would look like without any post in it. So I thought I'd throw that one in. I didn't actually record myself taking those posts out, but I just sort of share that with you. Anyway, like I said, I really hope you enjoyed that. Remember to keep an eye out for the photography podcast next week. And don't forget to pop over to Jamie's channel if you haven't already and take a look at this one from this week. It's very good. Yeah, and you know, I should be releasing a few more vlogs in the coming weeks. I have no idea what they're going to be on at the moment. I'm really struggling, I've got to be honest. It seems to be a lot of macro and indoor photography going on at the moment, so I might have to steer clear of that. I'm going to have to start getting very creative, I think, somehow. Anyway, like I said, I hope you enjoyed that, and thanks very much for watching, and I'll see you next time.